It's my pleasure and honor to introduce our next speaker, a woman I have known for over 15 years now. She has a variety of skill sets, one of which she's going to talk about today, which is best practices for managing virtual teams. Now, most, if not all of us on this call have managed folks remotely, I suspect at some level, and have used some virtual things to help accommodate that, probably more so in the recent months than we did in the past. One of the things I want to compliment, and I think very highly of Kristin on, is she was really ahead of the curve in terms of technology utilization in this area. So she's going to talk about some of the stuff that we've all been forced into using recently. She's been doing this stuff for years on end, so a lot of experience, a lot of depth in the area. And again, I thought she would provide some great context, insights, maybe some best practices for you to consider as you work in this new world of managing folks even more remotely than you may have done previously. Just a little bit of background on Kristin's bio. She has facilitated with us for over 15 years now. She actually focuses and specializes in high stakes meeting facilitation. Maybe even more impressive than that is Kristin is certified to actually train facilitators. So she's, I believe, what they call a master facilitator. And for anyone who's done some of that, by the way, there's a lot of things that go on in order to get that certification. So that's something I've always been very impressed with what Kristin does. She works with a lot of executives on their critical thinking skills, obviously strategic problem solving, which I think is important today as it probably ever was given the current environment. So great background. She knows the network well. Many of you, I think, have either had her as a facilitator and or a speaker. So Kristin, we're very excited and honored to have you back. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Why, thank you for that introduction, Rob. Really appreciate it. I wanted to introduce you to Tracy. Now, Tracy is my stepdaughter, and she is a controller at a construction firm in a major metropolitan city. And she has an hour-long commute into work, and she has at least an hour-long commute back home. And for years, she's been asking her boss, please, can I work from home? Can I be a remote worker, even just one day a week? And what was his response? No, Tracy, we need you here. You're important to be here. That's impossible. Well, guess what? COVID-19 comes into play, and he has to order her to go home to work. So now she is spending her time at home being more productive, and she's happier because she no longer has that commute. She's able to have lunch with her lovely husband, Dan, and she is thinking, oh my gosh, this is great. I have been asking for this for years. It's working. I go into the office, usually like later at night. I drop off the checks. I pick up what I need. So how is this gonna work? Am I gonna be able to keep doing this? She's thinking that she's gonna be able to keep doing this. And I gotta ask you, what do you think the boss is thinking? And I want you to just go into the chat box, that chat box, just like type in, what do you think the boss is thinking? What do you think the boss is thinking? And we're gonna look at that chat box right now. What do you think that boss is thinking? What do you think? Is she more productive at home or at work? You can't wait to get her back in the office. This is all temporary. I'm gonna be glad to have you back in the office. When can I have her back? But she's just as productive, and we're gonna be back to normal. So we just need you to come back into the office. Isn't that interesting? What I was hearing from a lot of folks, what you're thinking is, maybe if this is the new normal, is it really sustainable? Are we able to continue this? Or do I have to tell Tracy, who's maybe even more productive, that she has to be back in the office? So here's what we're kind of seeing, is that we have the BC before COVID, and we have the AC, the after COVID. And right now we're embarking on a very steep learning curve. Very steep learning curve. And We're learning things like Zoom. We've had Zoom before, we've had Teams, we've had Adobe Connect, we've had all these tools, but have we really used them? Maybe not. We've had a steep learning curve of tutorials. Like, I need to figure out how to cut my hair. I'm going to go online and figure out how to do that. We've had a steep learning curve of Amazon. If you weren't already buying things online or calling the grocery store and having them bring groceries out to you, well, now you're getting pretty used to it. And even going to a nice restaurant and having it delivered or doing takeout. I mean, all of these are things that we've had, but we've really never leveraged them. And now that we've been in this big learning curve, it's like, oh, okay, well, now we've got kind of this after coronavirus, the AC, where we're kind of like, okay, this is our new normal. But I'll bet that there are probably a few new normals. And it's going to take a while for us to figure out what that new normal is. And I got to think this whole notion about remote working, we've just ventured into this steep learning curve. And a lot of people are like going, hey, maybe I can work from home. Maybe I don't need to be back in the office. And I'll bet that Tracy's boss is now starting to go, yeah, maybe a couple of days you can work at home. We still need you to come back in the office every once in a while. But Tracy's kind of unusual because Tracy's in what I would call that top 15% in a standard distribution curve. She's an early adopter. She's someone that you would say, okay, I get this. I'm already set up for it. I'm good. And you probably have some people who, when you sent them home, they were like, good, no problem. I am an early adopter. And you probably had some who were clearly the resistors, about 15%, who said, no, I don't work very well at home. I can't work at home for whatever reason. And actually these folks are still coming to your office because nobody else is there. So they're still social distancing. It's fine, but you know, it's like not gonna work. And then there's that middle point. Now, here's the challenge is you really don't know which side of the fence they're on. Are they really doing okay? They're like, oh, okay, well, I had to kind of work through a couple of things. I needed to make sure that I've got good internet speeds and I've got, a safe, quiet place to work. And there are other people who have more challenges. They don't have a safe place, a quiet place, or maybe the kids are still at home, or maybe they're caring for their elderly parents, or, whatever is going on. Now that swath in there, those are the people that you really have to kind of think about how are you going to manage them, because in the BC world, we would basically send the early adopters into our remote worlds. And we still had the mothership that we cared about what was going on face to face. And they were kind of like just external appendages. Now it's almost like remote is the norm. And the people who come into the office are really the exceptions to the rule. So when you're looking at this, do you really think that you can just like continue remote working for the rest? Rob said in one of his comments, he said, hey, it's working well. Why don't we just do this indefinitely? And I'm going to suggest that you can't do that. You can do this for the short term because the people in the middle, they're doing this for you. They're doing this for the company. I don't know if it's a sustainable model. Now, I just got a question. So Joellen, could you put that up, the poll that basically asks this distribution curve? When you look at that curve, could you say, yeah, that's our distribution. We've got about 15% that just like gut this. We've got 15% that just kind of like, eh. And we've got some folks who are leaning over the right of adopting, and we've probably got some people who really want to come back to the office when all of this is over. Or maybe you have more adopters, maybe you have more resistors, or maybe you just go, I don't know, I'm not even in the office, Kristin. Take a moment. All righty. So Joellen, what's our answer there? You have more adopters. Very good for the most part. Or you say, yeah, that's our distribution. And sometimes you just have a little bit more resistors. Okay. So thank you very much for that. So we're going to be talking about this notion about how to manage remote teams. Because in the before coronavirus environment, we did have this kind of like mothership mentality where remote working is the exception to the rule. We had these video conferencing capabilities, but really face-to-face meetings were the norm. And kind of we had to remember that there were people who were on the conference call. You remember like everybody's, looking at the conference call machine in the middle of the desk. I would put pictures of the remote workers just so that we wouldn't forget about them. In the post world, the AC world, I would suggest that you probably have a smaller commercial footprint. I hope you're not in the REIT business. I was just listening to Mr. Wonderful. He was doing a speech. What's his name? Kevin O'Leary. And he was saying, I have no desire to go back to work. We're going to like minimize our footprint. Remote working is going to be more the norm, and you're going to have an extensive use of video conferencing, and face-to-face meetings are going to be more intentional rather than just more anecdotal. Kind of an interesting idea. And I was listening to Jane Atkinson. She was interviewing Rohit Bhargava. Now, Rohit is really a thought leader in virtual meetings. And I thought he had a fairly interesting angle on the world in the AC world for remote workers.
I think that one thing that we've all been reminded by with this whole remote working thing is that it's actually nice to be in the office. And the biggest benefit I think that will come from this is the employers that were generally super negative on letting anybody work remotely at all ever
Right.
are going to now start opening up. And so, I mean, it would be an amazing world if everyone could work remotely one day a week.
Mm-hmm.
Go into the office the other times. So I'm not saying, because some people hate working remotely. They don't like it. They don't like being in their own space. They like going into the office. It's hard. But if we started working remotely one day a week, one of the things that would happen is we wouldn't do virtual meetings anymore, because you do the meetings when you're in the office and you'd work when you're out of the office. So like the awesome thing about having every Friday working from home is no meetings, because now you're doing real work.
Right.
Isn't that cool? Just thinking about how can we integrate remote working. It's not a light switch. It's not a on or off. We have choices that could make everyone happier and more productive. Now, I will agree that there are challenges to working in virtual teams, because if you cannot lead teams well in a face-to-face environment, which is very anecdotal, it's very easygoing. If you can't do that well face-to-face, you're not going to be able to do it well virtually. When you're leading teams virtually, you have to be much more intentional. Because if you, the whole notion about the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. You can't do the same thing in the face-to-face environment and just translate it over into the virtual world. My advice is that you have to be much more intentional about all the aspects that you see. So let's play a little game. Fact or crap? The biggest challenge facing virtual teams is the difficulty for your team members to express opinions. Just shout at your monitor. Is that a fact or is it crap? What do you think? It is crap. The biggest challenge to facing virtual teams is the inability to read nonverbal cues. Nonverbal cues, especially when you do things by conference calling. That's why Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Adobe Connect and all of these tools, GoToMeeting, are becoming more popular. The inability to read nonverbal cues was the number one. Number two was no time during meetings to build relationships. So if you just focus on results, and you don't spend the time to talk about the relationships and for people to learn how to trust each other, that becomes a significant challenge. The absence of collegiality, that I'm part of something bigger than just me. I'm too isolated alone. And the difficulty to establish rapport and trust. Notice all of those are around the connection of the people who are on that team. So think about what are the ways that we can foster that connection. So Rob was great. He put out a little questionnaire to all of you who are attending today. And he said, one of the questions that we kept seeing in different shapes and fashions was, how do you keep employees working at home engaged and feeling part of the team and not isolated? So if you could just raise your hand, there's like a little sign down there, raise your hand. If you feel that that is a big issue for you, how do you keep your employees engaged? So Joellen, I'm going to ask you to report out what the results are. How many people are raising their hands?
Right now we have about 21 and the number's continuing to rise.
It's continuing to rise. So many of you are feeling that way. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. We're talking about how do we help people feel engaged? And there are three different ways, different levers that you have, because it's a balance to keep people engaged and productive and satisfied. It's about making sure that they're getting the results that you're expecting, that they're using good processes, and that they are staying in healthy collaborative relationships. And that's really the format that we're going to use for our rest of our time together. We're going to focus first on the results, then the process and the relationships. And if you think about it, it's kind of like a three-legged stool, in that if one of those legs is out of whack, then your team is out of whack. And so when you're looking at your virtual teams, think about, am I just talking about results, or I'm helping them figure out how can they accomplish their work more smoothly, more effectively, and are they in relationship with each other and with the company? So it is a balance. So we're going to go through 7 strategies, and that first strategy is about setting expectations. Some of this stuff, by the way, is you're going to go, Kristin, this is just a no-brainer. Yep, but are you doing it intentionally and deliberately with your virtual teams and each of your virtual team members? Because what you are able to do walking around the office, I mean, I saw that, my style is kind of like management by walking around. Well, you're not walking around in people's living rooms or in their offices. You have to intentionally think, okay, so how do I make sure that we are all on the same sheet of music? So step 1 is about setting expectations. And my best advice for this is to be as explicit as you can about what people's roles and responsibilities are, what the key tasks and critical milestones are, the expected team behaviors. What do you expect them to do when they're at home and not at home? Do you have core hours? Are they able to work whenever they want? Is it okay to work in their jammies? I don't know. How do you want to document what they do, and how responsive should they be to an email or a text, or how responsive should you be to their emails or to their texts? So be as explicit as you can with your employees. Now, I don't know about you, but the world of work is a little bit more complicated these days. This is a map that we used when we were talking about decision-making for the US Army in Afghanistan many years ago. And I've done a lot of work in critical thinking, and we mapped out all of the stuff that was going on. Now, you're not fighting a war in Afghanistan, you're just running your company. But I'll bet if you map out what's going on in your company, it probably looks a little something like that. And your employees know that. Now, they can either get tunnel vision and just look at one little thing, or they might get completely overwhelmed by everything. So part of our job is that either every day, every week, every month, we need to let them know where their focus should be. Now, in the Army, we call that the big fat TAC, BFT. We actually called it a different acronym. But the BFT kind of says, here's our focus. It's the commander's intent. Here's where we're going today. Here's where we're going this week. And it's really important that you convey what that mission is, that focus, the commander's intent to your teams. Now, you might not have that as a situation. You might not have like all kinds of different wild, crazy things going on in your world. We call this the VUCA world. It's volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous. You might have a little bit more of a static environment, or at least not as VUCA-ish. Now, if that's the case, I would recommend that you have some kind of North Star for your team. Some people call it a mission. I don't care what you call it. Just, do they know what they're supposed to be doing? Do they know who they do it for? The basic strategies of what's important, and then the why. Simon Sinek calls it, what's your purpose? So do they know what their mission is? Now, I don't care what you call it, but if you ask them, what does your team do? And what do you do in support of that team? Would they be able to answer it? Because it's kind of like they're cascading missions. You've got the company mission, your division, your business unit, down to the team, the individual. They all need to be connected and aligned. So let me give you an example. This is my company. My company is all about helping executives elevate their team's performance, their processes, and their relationships. And we do that primarily by facilitating. That's the key, what we do the most. We do some training, we do some speaking, panel moderation, and we do some consulting coaching. Yay! By the way, mine is covered up by people's like faces. So I'm doing that from scratch. I don't have it in front of me. I know what my mission is. And the reason why I do it is because I have a firm belief that all teams need to be just extraordinary, high-performing teams. Now, my team, and I do have a remote team of about 7 people who work with me. They do not work in my office. They all know what our company mission is. My company and me, we've got the same mission. And each of their jobs aligns to that. And they know they have a direct line of sight about how they help us accomplish that. So this is our North Star. So as a remote team member, if they can just tell me how what they're doing connects with my mission, I'm good. Like, yay, this is good. Yay. Having a mission. Now, if they do something that's off mission, I kind of like, that's when I can I can go, excuse me. Because in a remote world, you have to have a lot of trust. Trust in what the results are. If you've set the expectations, you have trust. Now, along with trust, you need to like hold people accountable, and you can hold people accountable to their metrics. So I would recommend that you have some kind of visual dashboard. Now, many of you have systems in place that you can somehow provide that information, or they provide it to you. Some people are still using like Excel spreadsheets. That's okay, not a problem. Keep a visual dashboard about what their performance is, whether it's leading measures or lagging measures. Here's a summary dashboard that you can use. For example, I like it because it's very visual. It allows me to see what's going on. This is a visual dashboard for more project-oriented things. There's all kinds of dashboards. Just Google visual dashboards and you'll see all kinds. I highly recommend that you have it in place. Now, CEM brought in Alice Goldfein, and he was talking about having a visual dashboard and that it showed people's results and their activities but actually showed them in comparison with each other so that people can see how they stack up with each other. That's a great idea too. Somehow their results and their activities, you need to be able to have insight into it, and they need to be able to see the insight with their other team members. Okay, so I am going to finish this last portion because this is about results, and it's about making sure that you've set expectations and that you have some kind of visual dashboard to check on those expectations. Now, here's what I thought was interesting. This is another question that came in with Rob's questionnaire. He said, the owner of our company just doesn't trust. So how do I get this owner to be able to trust that the work is getting done? Everybody else seems to be happy with it. Like, what do we do? And you know, I'm just wondering, just again, raise your hand. Joellen, I'm going to ask you to tell me how many of you kind of feel this way? Like, the work is getting done right now, but I still have this niggling fear that I'm not being told the truth, or I'm not sure that the work is actually getting done. What do you think, Joellen?
Right now we are at 10, but it's still rising a little bit too.
Still rising. So a couple of you are like, yeah, I don't know. What do I do about that? Now, I thought Ernest Hemingway, he had a great quote. He said, the best way to find out to trust somebody is to trust the person. I mean, start there. Assume positive intent, given the fact you don't just trust anybody willy-nilly, but you need to be clear about your expectations and tasks, equipment with the tools that are necessary. Check in regularly. Wayne was talking in his earlier remarks about maybe you even check in on a daily basis. If you're not fully trusting, if you're not fully empowering, then maybe you need to check in more regularly. So check in regularly is different for every team member on a remote team. You need to coach them as needed, whether they need to be instructed, guided, or inspired. And many of you have heard my coaching model. So, you don't coach everybody the exact same way. It's based on their abilities and their eagerness to do that task. You want to be able to review their outcomes and tie their metrics to performance objectives and share best practices and make sure that they're still learning so that they can be the A players in a remote world, and you feel just as confident that they would be doing as good a job in the face-to-face world. Trusting people is easier said than done, right? And that's all about the relationships. Do you trust them? And you have to do that because of the relationships. You can't be on them. You can't be in their living room. You can't be in their office. Now, where process is important, because you can really manage to results and outcomes, but when process is important and you just can't let it go, you need to have those processes documented. Whether it's an SOP, operating guidelines, process guides, you put it on a wiki on your intranet. If process is important to you and they need to fulfill certain processes, either from a safety, ethical, legal, quality assurance, whatever your reason is, make sure that it's documented that they need to follow that, because they're working from home. They're working from a remote office. They need to be able to do that. Okay, so it is a balance of results, process, and relationships. And now we are going to move into the process side, the how the work gets done in a remote environment. Now, I'm not going to talk about every single job. That's more your side of the fence about, here's the way that you should be doing your work. And if it's important from a process side, it should be documented in some way. What we're going to be talking about right here is the process that you use and your teams use to work remotely. So strategy number 3 is communicate often. People even in a face-to-face office environment complain that they don't get enough information. I don't know if you can get too much of the right information. You get too much information, but I don't know if you can get too much of the right information. So I thought this was interesting. Harvard Business Review said the number one thing that you could do to create good remote teams is to make sure that team members constantly feel like they know what's going on. And you've got to have a drum beat. So you read the rest of this. You've got to have a drum beat of letting people know what's going on. Do you have a drum beat? That drum beat. Now, do you have that drum beat? Do you know what your drum beat is? So I recommend that you have some kind of communication plan. And this communication plan is easy to develop. I just did this with a group. We were doing some scenario planning, and we were talking about, okay, so how do we keep each other updated and on track? So I did this with the leadership team. You can do it with any of the team, is to have each member go around and share their preferred style and their vehicles. So like I'm a direct style. I prefer talking tasks. Some people like relationships first. They're more indirect, or, I like texting. I like email first, or, just like have everybody share what's your style and what vehicles do you prefer. And then just note the commonalities and differences. And then inventory all the ways that you communicate. I'm just curious, in the chat box, just write down all the ways that you communicate. I just said email and texting. What are all the ways that you communicate among your team members? Just go ahead, and I'll compile this list of all the different ways that you communicate. Go ahead. So we've got phone calls. Emails, Skype, IM, Zoom, Teams, phone calls, IM, newsletters, okay, GoToMeeting, FaceTime, okay. That list is probably more extensive than what you think. For all of the ways that you communicate, note what's good and what's not so good about each. And then for the things that are good, ask, how do we replicate those good aspects in the remote world? Okay. Everybody communicates differently. What your culture is, you need to be leveraging that culture. So I'm not going to give you like the playbook, but I would suggest that you find out what people's inherent styles and what vehicles they prefer, and then inventory all the ways you currently communicate, and then what's good and what's not so good. And then you're also going to want to list your formal and informal meetings and any rituals that you have. Are those still relevant in the virtual world? And then develop a meeting plan and some kind of cadence. This is a honest to God story. Joe, my husband, was coaching an executive, and he had sent everybody home, and he's like, I really, the work's getting done, I think. I don't know for sure. And he said, so, are you having your regular meetings? And he said, what? And it's like, you should be following your same cadence meeting plan that you had in the face-to-face world, but in the virtual world. And here's what happens is you're so used to just like dropping in on people or doing a gather around meeting that we forget, oh, I need to do that much more deliberately in the virtual world, right? So, and most meetings have some kind of social aspect to that. As people are gathering together, they're chatting like, so how's it going? How's the game? How's the weather? Do you do that in the chat boxes before your meetings? I usually, when I'm with a group, I'm blowing up that chat box because that's a great way to be chatting with folks. So here's an example communication plan that we put together, which is here's how we want to be talked to when there's something urgent, or maybe if there's something urgent with explanation, we've got some tools, and these are the tools that people decided, let's do that. We did have a little bit of a disagreement on file sharing and updates. Some people like Dropbox and some people like Google. And so we actually differentiated, when does something go to Dropbox and when does something go to Google Docs, which I thought was just hysterical. So it's a communication, it's having some kind of communication plan. I hope that that's helpful as you move into using more remote teams as an intentional practice. Now, if you want to know more information about using different specific tools, I highly recommend this book. Can you hear me now? Well, there's no "Can you hear me now?" That's Verizon's tagline, but this is "Can you hear me?" It's written by a guy named Nick Morgan. I've been following him for years. He actually wrote a book, the very first book, on audience-centered speaking, which I thought was great. And his book was, and then he renamed it later to "Give a Speech, Change the World." And his philosophy was, if you're going to bother giving a speech, you should change the world. That's your objective. And I hope that I'm helping change your perspective on managing remote teams. So along with process and communicating often, there's a coordination piece around tasks. So you probably have some project task management software or document management, Dropbox, Google Docs, or you've got it on your intranet. You've got some kind of dashboard that shows results. You've got some kind of time tracking versus time logging. Time logging is what payroll is most interested in. Time tracking is, what are you working on? Rapid communications among team members, and then calendaring. So Joellen, I think we're due for a poll here. Of those, I'm just curious, but what are you missing? Just check off if you're missing any of these tasks. Chances are you probably have at least 80%, but do you have all of them? Because all of these are really important in the virtual world. Give it another couple of seconds. And Joellen, what do we have here? Customizable dashboard. Yeah, that's usually the one that's missing the most. Having some kind of time tracking or calendaring, and sometimes those can be actually the same kind of program. So maybe a takeaway is explore different ways that you can help your remote teams coordinate their tasks better. By the way, you will be getting a copy of these slides. I think we normally do that. The other thing is to meet regularly. Okay, so June was just asking, what's the difference between time tracking versus time logging? Okay, so let me just back up and clarify that one. Time logging is, I came to work at 8, I'm leaving at 6. Okay, in a remote team, that might not be important, by the way. That's just tracking I was working, or I worked between 9 in the morning to 10 in the morning, then I took a break, then I'm gonna, that's time logging. Time tracking is from 9 to 10, I was working on my PowerPoint design. From 10:30 to 11:30, I was calling clients, or, like you're actually logging what you're doing with your time. So you're tracking what you're doing with your time. I hope that that's helpful. Okay, so meeting regularly, face-to-face. As you bring on remote workers, if you can bring them into the mothership initially for them to meet their team or come together in this post-coronavirus world, I would recommend coming together face-to-face. Online, you've got conference calling, you've got video conference calling, and you've got to have some kind of instant messaging kind of capability. Having some kind of opportunity to meet regularly. Now, I will tell you, in the BC world, conference calling was more the norm. Now in the AC world, Zoom is more the norm. I was just setting up a conference call with a client, and it was like assumed it was a Zoom call. Whereas before, it was always we would be on his conference call line. It's an interesting dynamic that we're living in. I had another client who said, no agenda, no attenda. You know, a good thing for remote teams is when you have a meeting is that you follow those good guidelines about having an agenda. You know, you send it out 24 hours prior so that people can come prepared. Here's the interesting thing that I find in remote. The agendas are much tighter, much tighter. And I really recommend like 50 minutes and then people take a break, because it's just really tough to sit down for 50 minutes and not take a break, and to use breakout rooms. If you have groups that are more than 5, because people are a little awkward. They're still a little in the awkward phase. I think this whole notion about speaking in the virtual world, in the new normals, is probably going to be much less awkward. But right now it's just still a little awkward, and people are still kind of polite and they don't want to step over people's toes. So I would highly recommend that you use some breakout rooms here and there. So Roger Schwartz is kind of like the granddaddy of facilitators. And I love one of these techniques is he said, twist the topic. Rather than saying the topic is coronavirus, ask what's the question you want answered. I mean, because coronavirus as a topic, it's too big, it's too broad. We don't know what you want to talk about, but it might be coronavirus, developing core hours. What's the question? What's the best core team time that we should have? So as you're putting your agendas together, I highly recommend, especially in the remote world, you ask yourself, so what's the question we want to answer? And then people can come prepared for that. Have routine huddles, whether it's a day or a week. I think, Wayne, you had mentioned this. This is just a little format that I like to use that makes it quick. It's about 10, 15 minutes once people get in the groove of it. But it starts off, and you can mix up the order, it really doesn't matter. It starts off with a news flash. What's the news that needs to be communicated? What are the figures? You take a look at the dashboard. What's the focus for the day or the week? Is anybody stuck? Do you need help or advice? Now, that is not to stop and say, let's help that person. Let's do problem solving. It's like, no, I need help figuring out this. And then somebody says, I'll help you with that. Let's get together after this huddle. Are there any ahas, something that's of interest to the team? Attitude of gratitude. I got this from one of our CEN members, Accuform. They always started every meeting off with an attitude of gratitude. Like, what do we have to be thankful for, especially in today's day and age? We got a lot to be thankful for. Any day above day is a good ground. And then lastly, who's the next huddle master? Because you don't want to have to be the one who's constantly, leading the meeting. You want to be able to share the wealth. Okay, so when it comes to engaging, it's really about being visible and accessible. So establish team time. A team time is one time during the day that for 15 minutes, you just say, hey, everybody kind of drop what you're doing. Let's go get on a Zoom call, or let's chat, and let's just have a cup of coffee together and just chat. You're not talking about business. You're just talking relationships. You know, maybe some business comes up, but generally that's not the focus of it. It's team time. I like tea, so I called it tea time. Huh. Okay, so I thought it was funny. Have core office hours. Because people do like having the flexibility of being able to work at their leisure when they're working at home. But that being said, you need to know that there's some core hours that they're going to be there. So I would suggest that you have maybe a 3-hour swath, especially if you're all over the United States or even you're international. Once we get past this sheltering at place, I would recommend that you go visit them. Like, find out what their work environment is. Find out, how their internet connection is. Find out, I don't know about you, but I'm directly plugged into my Ethernet now because the bandwidth gets sucked dry at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon when all the kids are, sucking in the bandwidth. So you want to make sure that people are, able to do the work, what they've got set up for them. And being supportive and empathetic. That's really the key, is just that you care. One-on-ones, make sure that you're checking in with them. Now, it's really important that you move throughout the day. I don't know about you, but I am not used to sitting and being on Zoom all day. I'm just not. I'm used to moving around. If you notice, I'm even like standing up and doing this one. If you have a standing desk, or, stand up while you're on the phone, or my watch has a timer that goes off every 30 seconds to stand. This is a big health risk right now, and nobody's really like talking about it. But I would suggest that you move. In fact, we're about like 35 minutes into this, 40 minutes into this. I think it's time for us to move. So everybody get up and move, like stand up, like please stand up. And if you want to be a curmudgeon, go ahead, you sit, but you can sit and still like raise your arms over your head, like stretch. This is called a torso stretch, like breathe up and exhale down. You can do some shoulder shrugs. Doesn't that feel good? Just stand up, shake out your legs. Very, very well fit.com has lots of really great videos. I highly recommend, send those out. Do these as like little icebreakers, or break up not the monotony of your meetings. Your meetings are not monotonous, but they could be. Break it up like every 30 minutes. Get people to just kind of like move. Okay, strategy number 4 is about encouraging interaction. Now, I do know that we got quite a few questions on this one, which is about how do we encourage interaction at meetings? Because what you are used to in the BC world is very polite, awkward engagement. It's just a little awkward. And in the future, the post, it'll be much more fluid, because people are going to understand the group dynamics, and how to use breakout rooms. It's interesting that in the before COVID world, people would basically use these kinds of tools like Zoom as more webinar-ish. I'm going to convey information to you. Whereas there is a meeting function in Zoom that allows more fluidity. And that's what we're going to be having our roundtable discussions in. So the interesting part is that because everybody's got the same size, like little Brady Bunch window, it does allow people to have more equal voices if you provide the opportunities for them to share. So I always recommend starting with an icebreaker of sorts. Just start with something that's light and amusing. It could be a question, it could be a visual, it could be a video. Maybe it's a stretch video. Maybe it's a cartoon. Maybe it's a maybe it's a musical parody. That is the Ode to Zoom by the Holderness family. I am getting they do these parody pandemic songs. I think they're funny. Start off with something lighthearted. It could even be just a simple question, like, what's your superpower? I love that. And just go around and let people answer it. Like, start off with an icebreaker. It sets the tone that people are going to be engaged, and then keep track. As soon as I get in a meeting, and you'll see me do this in my roundtable discussions, I warn you people, is I write their names down. And then, I just make sure that people are talking. How much airtime are people using? If I go around for a poll or a lightning round, I'll just take a notice. So keep track. And then if someone is not necessarily engaging, I don't call them out during the meeting. I just call them afterwards and go, so, hey, what's going on? And if you have some ground rules that keep people engaged, you set up these explicit expectations that all participate, no one dominates. You've seen that one before. That's a SEN ground rule. It's about honoring time limits. We're going to start on time and we're going to end on time. Come prepared. Have the agenda set ahead of time. Have some core hours. Find a quiet space. Having a quiet space or using headphones. The Plantronics headphones is great when you've got kids running around. We had this guy who was on one of our calls who, like, literally his kids were screaming in the background. He's like, I couldn't hear it. It was great. Mute when you're not talking. And I recommend that you always keep your video on. Mark, you were asking in the chat box, do you always suggest using the video function? I do, because we want to see you. Try not to multitask during meetings. Be concise in your comments and additive. We don't need to be repetitive. Remember, team remote meetings are much more focused. They are faster. So you want people to be additive. You want people to speak up if you have something to say. And here's an interesting point that I got from Nick's book that I didn't really pay attention to until I read his book is, express feelings where appropriate, or do a lightning round. Like, so how do you feel about what we're talking about? Or I'll do an emoticon check-in. So if you had to pull an emoticon right now that would just punctuate what we're talking about, what would it be? Because this kind of environment doesn't really show, I'm being exaggerated when I'm excited and things. People aren't going to do that on yours. They're not going to do that. And it's about asking quieter members for their opinion if they have not been contributing as much. And that's why I like the checklist. I find that one thing that really inhibits virtual meetings when you're using kind of Zoom, GoToMeeting, is this idea about having it easy to mute on and off. Now, Zoom does have if you hit the space bar on some Zoom, not all, depends on what model you have, what model computer you have, and how you've got it set up. But if you hit the space bar, it will unmute you. And when you unlift the space bar, it will go back to muting you. I personally like using a Yeti Nano mic because it's got like this little green button and I can just hit the button and I'm muted. And I really like that. The Plantronics has the ability to have the mute button as well. Find out what people are using and if it's easy. Like if people aren't having any problem, but I don't know about you, but people are like, oh, you're muted. You're muted. Ugh, drives me nuts. Also confirm action items at the end of your meeting. Do a lightning round where every person reports what they're going to do and by when as a result of the meeting. You should probably do that face to face, right? So this is a list of things that you can do. So I am just going to stop here and Joellen, do we have any questions in the question box?
Yeah, we have a few. The first question is, how do you maintain company culture?
Yeah, so that is, that's another presentation that I've given to CEN. That's a drumbeat. That's in your drumbeat about your company culture. I'm going to be talking a little bit later about onboarding. All the things that you do in onboarding to like tell people about their culture, you need to like reinforce constantly with your remote workers. That is the short answer to a difficult question, but you have to be intentional about it, much more intentional than you were even in a face-to-face environment.
The next question is, how do you do effective brainstorming? I found people seem less energetic on video conferences.
Yeah, so brainstorming, that's a great question. Brainstorming, really, I recommend that people come prepared for brainstorming. And then or if they're not prepared, you put them in breakout rooms to start. Like always let people to think about the question, breakout rooms, then I normally go in a round robin, like I'll do a lightning round first. I'll ask everybody, or My favorite technique is I have people lob something to somebody. So like, I'm going to say, you know, when it comes to brainstorming the flavors of potential new ice cream, I'm going to suggest rum raisin with walnuts. I don't know why I just thought about that. I'm going to pass the ball over to Rob, and Rob's going to add his, and then he's going to pass the ball over to Joellen. And then, you know, it's like, okay, we're going to pass the ball. That's kind of a fun way of doing it. There are some collaboration tools out there. I'm going to highly recommend Mural, mural.co, is a great Post-it note-ish, very graphical design opportunity to brainstorm. But I think the idea is to, if you're asking for creativity, you need to like think, how do I want to create the agenda? It's different in a virtual world. If you even notice this presentation, it's different than what I do in a face-to-face world, because it's got to be tighter. It's got to be more interactive. It's got to be, it's just different. So you want to think through. If you want some ideas, feel free to reach out to me at kristin@kristinarnold.com, and I'll be happy to chat with you further.
The next question is, if there's trust between employees, do you still need time tracking, or is that too micromanaging? Or is this for yourself versus your employees?
I think time tracking is important at a global scale. Depending on what your trust level and what you have your employees working on, that's your decision. But I personally, as a remote employee, they should do some kind of tracking that says, here's what I'm working on, just so that you know. It might be that they're reporting it in the huddle and it's not like I'm clocking in the time, but you should have an idea of what they are working on, as well as the results that they achieve.
Next question is, should there be a size limit on video conferencing? How many people is ideal?
That's a really good question. I have done a video meeting with 150 people. I haven't done anything bigger than that, but I used a lot of small groups and then larger groups. You know, you just have to be more intentional about how you're going to get people interaction, or do you want it to be more webinar-ish? Yep.
Looks like that's all our questions for now.
All righty. Well, then I am going to continuing on, because we are talking about the last leg of that stool, which is about relationship. And if you notice, the conversations that we've had about getting great results and using smooth processes all affect the relationships that we build. And so strategy number 5 is about creating informal gatherings, or maybe it's about recreating informal gatherings. Now, I know many of you are doing happy hours, so yay on that. We actually orchestrated that everybody had their favorite drink. And we talked about getting Drizzly to actually deliver the drink to them all at the same time, but that didn't pan out because not everybody had Drizzly. Drizzly is an alcohol delivery service. It's like Uber Eats, but for booze. But we had everybody bring their favorite drink, and they had to explain, like, this favorite drink, what's their favorite drink? What's the recipe? It was really a lot of fun. So many of you are doing happy hours. Yay, that's good. If you don't have a 24/7 chat room kind of setup, I would recommend that. You know, when you do your huddles, spotlight an individual for the day. Share us a little bit about, you know, what are your hobbies? What are your passions? What's, you know, or share one thing that you know how to do that maybe the rest of us don't know how to do. That kind of leads into this lunch and learn. It doesn't have to do anything with work, but it's like, hey, I do macrame. Let me show you. How interesting is that? You know, it's getting to know each other. Have some interesting project challenges that people can work on together, or do some fun competitions or games. There's a lot of gaming that's going on Zoom. You remember those board games? Oh my gosh, you can do like board games, or it's the possibilities are endless. I like providing professional development opportunities. Have people watch the same YouTube video tutorial, or the Linda, which is now LinkedIn tutorials, and then you have a discussion afterwards. You could have a lunch and learn presentation. The possibilities are endless. So just think about how do you want to recreate or create new opportunities for social gatherings. Strategy number 6 is you will have new members. And I know many of you are hiring, even though this is a great opportunity for us to get rid of the people that we have been tolerating and then bring in the talent that has been laid off, or there's opportunities there. I know many executives that I'm talking to are using this as an opportunity, but you're integrating new members remotely. So how do you do that? So time for a fact or a crap. 33% of employees know whether they will stay with their company long-term after the first week. Do you think that is a fact or is it crap? Just tell the computer. It is a fact. 33% of employees know that they'll stay. So you really want to make sure that their onboarding plan is tight. Now you are going to get this slide. And I'm not going to go through all of this because I want to honor our time limits. And I'm already pretty close there. But there are certain things that you do pre-boarding and the first day so that they can spend the first week getting to know you and your culture. All of that paperwork and crap, in fact, this should be true for your face-to-face too. All of this should be sent ahead of time. The key is that you want to invest the time in them. Okay, my slide will advance back. You want to invest the time, spend one-on-one time, have them get to know the people, get to know your culture, get to know their teammates. That is the investment of that time. So number 7 is about celebrating often. This is the last strategy. It's about celebrating often. When you hit major milestones, yes, pizza party, that's what we normally do in the office environment. I'm going to suggest micro celebrations are just as important, if not more so, in the remote environment. So whenever you see an opportunity to celebrate success, you heard something great about something that somebody did, birthdays, special occasions. I love delivering pizzas all at the same time. I love doing coordination things that they didn't expect, toasts at different times. And there's a host of different ideas. Just be creative. These things kind of normally happen in a face-to-face environment. They do not happen in a remote environment unless you make it so. So those are the 7 kind of strategies that I think are important about setting expectations. Keeping a dashboard is the results piece. Communicating often, encouraging interaction is the process piece, and creating informal gatherings, integrating new members, and celebrating often. You need to be paying equal attention to all 3 of these areas so that when your remote workers are in the post-corona, the AC world, that they are just as excited, just as productive, just as happy, and you are just as excited that they are productive and happy as well. So I hope you got some great ideas, some interesting takeaways, because that's our brand promise, SEN, and enjoy the rest of the day. I think I'm out of time, Joellen. I'm not sure that there's any other questions or if we have time, but it has been my pleasure sharing some insights on virtual teams.
That is it. Thank you very much.
Excellent.